There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel right now. Atiba Madyun is the founder and president of Party Politics US. Simon Marks is the president and chief correspondent for Feature Story News. He joins us from his headquarters here in Washington. And Michael Johns is the co-founder of the National Tea Party Movement. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Michael, let me start with you. Let's start with the arrest of that NSA contractor in Georgia, charged with leaking intelligence to the media. The president and his staff have made much of the leaks that have bedeviled this White House since he came to office. Is the White House now cracking down?
I think the president's committed to. I think that the concerns are very legitimate. I mean, there is undeniably a so-called deep state. And by that, what do we mean? We mean entrenched bureaucrats that likely do have a political agenda, in this case, that are comfortable releasing, information that is deemed classified. Having had gone through a process and having had a security clearance, I mean, there's no higher really obligation than we have as a government employee than to maintain secrecy of information that we incur. And I think both as it relates to bureaucrats and potentially even as it relates to some political appointees, there are deep concerns that there's not a sufficient commitment to that. The other thing I'd add is that increasingly, this has really only occurred over the last decade or two. There was this ongoing reliance of contractors, which was the case in this woman from Georgia, where you're relying on people that are not essentially official government employees, but are contracted by the government, are probably more loosely managed, and maybe don't hold that obligation quite as seriously as others do. So it's a deep concern, it's a legitimate concern. I think it's a bipartisan concern. I don't think there's any partisanship behind it. And yes, absolutely, it's got to stop.
Yeah, right. There are something like 800,000 people in the United States who have top secret clearance.
Right.
Atiba, we have the arrest of the contractor on the one hand, but let's look at the content of what was leaked, that elements of the Russian military intelligence tried to hack into voter registration software. Now, there's no evidence that Russia actually influenced the outcome of the election or sabotaged the election in any way. But what are we to make of the information that she provided?
Well, I think it's interesting because there are a lot of people who question, when we started talking about that there was collusion with Russia, that wanted to know, were the election results impacted in some way from electronic thievery? In terms of manipulating the machines. We saw and we heard about some of this that happened in some states. There were some reports that something like this happened in North Carolina. But this is the first time that we've seen something that there was some type of intelligence that was speculating whether or not this had actually happened. Yeah. What she did, though, I think is also part of kind of like this resist movement. It's very clear that she is against Donald Trump. It's very clear that she was a Hillary supporter or Bernie supporter. But in terms of how she did this, and I think that what Michael just said, in terms of how she did this, it begs to say that, if you have a security clearance, there's a certain way that you go about this, especially if you think that you're going to be a whistleblower. You just don't print out a piece of paper and fold it up.
She used the mailing service to send these documents. She copied them on an NSA
That's how they caught it.
It doesn't sound like she knew what she was doing.
No, I think that this was someone who was young and naive, who was looking to try to, I don't think she was trying to get her name out there. I definitely think she thought that she was doing the right thing by trying to get some information out here to make a point and start a conversation.
Okay. Simon, how much credibility could we attach to these reports that Russian military intelligence tried to hack voter registration software? Just before we came on air, American media were reporting that Russian hackers had placed a false story on a Qatar newswire service, which led to a huge diplomatic and security crisis in the Gulf. I mean, do these things happen because of a false wire service story?
Well, I mean, I think these things can now happen because of a false wire service story, and that's one of the reasons why we know that the Russians, not just in the US during the American election, but in France, for example, during the recent French election, were devoting an enormous amount of money and resource to trying to promulgate truly fake news stories in a bid to swing the outcome of elections. I do think you have to put credence in all of these reports. This this document that this very hapless leaker leaked to The Intercept, a news organization which, by the way, appears to have burned her in the process, this document does clearly indicate that Russian government military intelligence at a senior level was trying to learn things about voter registration software and about voter registration programs here in the United States. That is not the kind of innocent hacking attempt that Vladimir Putin, in that interview clip that we saw earlier in the program, appeared to be suggesting that, you know, Russian hackers not connected to the state may have been engaged in. These people, according to this leaked document, and no one's pushing back against the authenticity of the document, these people were directly tied to the Russian state.
Michael, what are we to make of the fact that ever since this president came to office, in fact, even before he came to office, there have been these allegations of Russian involvement in the election year, that there's been collusion between Russia and his campaign. It's taken the oxygen out of everything else.
It sure has, and here's what to make of it. Absolutely nothing. There is zero that has emerged to date that suggests that even one vote in this country in the 2016 election was in any way altered or affected by Russian engagement. Here's the other point that's worth bringing up. We did not have 25-year-old government contractors releasing information that demonstrates that this has been going on before the 2016 election. But I can assure you, you know what will be really big news is if we could say in any one election since, say, 1960 or even the onset of the Cold War, that there was any election where Russia did not attempt in a way to influence U.S. policy or U.S. government. That is the nature of a superpower regime that has essentially defined itself in largely hostile position to the United States interests that does that routinely. It happened in 2012. It happened in 2008. We don't have all the details, but the government of the United States does have those details. And so it's not particularly reflective of anything new in the way of Russia's engagement in the attempt to alter the direction of this country. The important thing to realize is what you said, is it's taking the air out of things, is that Donald Trump has arrived with essentially a mandate to make some really transformative changes in this country as it relates to healthcare policy, as it relates to securing the border, as it relates to tax release, as it relates to infrastructure. And Congress of the United States has got to get back onto those issues because we're coming up now on 2018 off-year elections, and that's precisely what the American people are going to judge them on. You're not going to be able to go back to your congressional district a year and a half from now and say, well, I've been in Washington working about Russia, because that's not what's on the minds of the American voter. They want to see action on these issues.
Okay, Simon, I'll get to you in a moment, but Atiba, go ahead.
62 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. 65 million voted for Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump doesn't have a mandate.
No, that's a mandate.
No,
that's
he doesn't
the way we
have a mandate.
structure our system.
He doesn't have a mandate.
You got to rewrite the rules if you want to change
He won because of the Electoral College, but he did not.
No, but that's the way you run a campaign.
You win with a mandate when you have the majority of the populace. He didn't have that.
But you don't run a campaign on popular vote that's not determined on the popular vote. If you would, he would have been in California. He would have been in New York State. He didn't do that because that's not the rules of the game.
He came to office.
You understand?
Needing to try to unite the country.
Applying baseball rules to a football game. It doesn't make any sense.
He came to Washington with
needing
to try to unite the country. He has not done that. So what we have right now, when you say that the air has been deflated, it has been deflated because we have a president who continues to say one thing and then does another. He has aides that say one thing and then he comes out and says another. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. So the credibility of what we see with the president, what Putin said and his comments about earlier in terms of what the United States has done.
Right.
I think he made a good point that we haven't really talked about. We keep talking about what Russia did. We never talk about what we do. We never talk about what our government is doing in other countries that actually brings towards the type of responses that we're getting around the world. And it is because of the way and the manner in which our president, who I think with his tweets is actually putting us on unsafe ground. We just saw what happened in Manchester. We've seen what happened in London. We see what happened today in Paris. These things, words matter. How you say things, they matter, and they have an impact not just on the American people, but on the whole spectrum.
Simon, go ahead.
Michael talks as though Donald Trump is somehow a passive player in all of this. He isn't. He's absolutely active. The air may have gone out of his administration, but that's partly, in large measure, because he's presiding over the pump. It is laughable to say that these Russia investigations have led to absolutely nothing.
But where is
Far
it?
from it.
Where is,
they
what
have
vote?
revealed
What vote
a
in what
large
state
pattern.
specifically has
They
been
have
changed?
revealed a large pattern of
Where?
hidden.
Specifically, where?
They have revealed a large pattern. If you'll let me finish. They have revealed a large pattern of undisclosed communications between senior figures within the Trump campaign, including the president's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, without question, lied on the security clearance form that he was due to fill out, that he was required to fill out in order to become a senior figure within the White House about the contacts that he had with Russians. I'm not sure that we yet know how it altered the outcome of the 2016 elections.
Until you can prove that it has.
Possibly argue. But you cannot possibly argue that there is absolutely nothing to see here, as the White House, of course, was telling reporters like me back in February. There is plenty to see here. And if there was nothing to see here, why did so many senior figures close to Donald Trump fail to disclose the communications and contacts that they had with Russian officials?
Good question. It's not an election-altering question.
Right now.